Well, the day has finally come. I'm going to talk a lot about Hoya undulata. But first of all, hello. If you are new here, my name is Miro, and if you are frequently here, you know my name, and I know that you have a Hoya problem and a plant problem and, probably all sorts of problems, but we're not gonna get into those today. Of course, everyone is welcome, the new and the old. And everyone in between, I guess. And as you can see from the title of the video, which I actually don't know why I'm pointing up, it's not above my head. I don't know, it's actually below, probably on the screen, but we are going to talk about Hoya undulata, and I'm going to tell you everything, and I mean everything, that I know about this plant. So I actually don't really know how long this video is going to be. At the time of recording this video, I have not finished the outline. I have sat down with myself and I tried to think of all the possible questions that you might have. I probably did not manage to gather them all, so I expect there will be actually questions in the comments, but I would like to think that I did a pretty decent job here. And I did not finish the outline because, honestly, we don't need to, and the time has come for me to record this video, but at the time of recording, there's like 2,000 words at least in the outline that I have prepared. So it's probably gonna be a long video, like, let's face it, I go on digressions all the time, this being one of them. For everyone who is an impatient watcher, every single question will get its chapter. So this video will be heavily chaptered, so you can skip through them if you are interested in one thing and you're not interested in another. Of course, as the creator of this video and someone who is going to make some money from it, I do recommend watching the entire video. But of course, if you want to skip to a chapter, you will see them below on the timeline of the video, but also like in the description there are chapters and you can use them, and I recommend you to use them. Because people sometimes complain that I talk too much, which I do know. I live with myself. I know. And also this will be useful if you return to this video later on. You can just quickly go through the chapters. Again, I don't know what's up with my actions today. You're not playing the piano. I have 3 potentially different clones of Hoya undulata. One of them is 4 years old. Actually, it just probably turned 4 years old, and it is next to me. I did try to lift her up so you can see her better, but I don't think I did a great job, and I will probably knock her over by the end of this video because she is next to me. And we all know that my coordination is amazing. So this is my oldest plant that went through quite a journey with me, which, I will go into detail what this plant has gone through. This is not original plant. It is part of the original plant, but I will give you like a detail tour via the B-roll of the plant, of the leaves, and we will discuss again heavily everything that I have gathered over the years on how to grow this plant. We have 2 other that are very recent, one of them actually not even a month old, and another that I got at the end of March when I went to Sweden. So let's just dive in. Hoya undulata is a plant that was relatively recently published. When I say relatively recently, I really mean in the past 20 years, because we have Hoyas that have been published, 100 years ago. So compared to that, like, we can say it's relatively recent, but this one was published in 2015 by Sri Rahayu. I'm actually not sure on the pronunciation, so I do apologize. And Michele Roda, in that pronunciation, I am sure of. And it was published in Garden Singapore Bulletin. Actually, I do need my plant for this section. So Hoya undulata got its name by the undulate margins of the leaf. And this word actually comes from the Latin word undula, which does mean wavy, as you can see. And different clones have a different degree to this undulation, and it's certainly not the only Hoya that will produce this undulate or slightly serrated edge, which does sometimes lead to confusion of this plant with another, which again I will talk a little bit later in the video. But this plant comes from Borneo, from Kalimantan only. And it was discovered during an expedition in West Kalimantan by Sulaiman Hasim. And this is actually the only type locality from which we know about Hoya undulata, and the locality where this plant was discovered is near an Indonesian town in Kapuas Regency called Putusibau, which I actually think I'm mispronouncing. I did look it up, but of course I already forgot, so let me check again.
Putusibau.
So internet says Putusibau. I don't know, I would pronounce this as Putusibau, so whichever of those is correct. Maybe none of those is correct. If we have people from Indonesia or someone who is familiar with the correct pronunciation, please do chime in. So it is known only from West Kalimantan. It was observed in lowland heath forests about 300 meters above sea level, and this is a plant that I would say is a true epiphyte in nature. It was observed growing epiphytically on trees and in ant nests, which again, something we will have to come back to, about 1.5 meters from the ground. And I think they said in the publication around 80% humidity and 50% of shade. So this is definitely not your Hoya that, I mean, you can expose it to higher light. Again, we will talk about it. Okay, I think I can leave my Hoya aside from a moment, or one of my undulatas, because we're going to talk a little bit about climate, which is actually very important. And it is one of the things that I think will potentially influence your success the most when it comes to growing Hoya undulata well. The climate in this region is of course tropical. This is a region that gets a lot of rain throughout the year. The rainy season is essentially entire year. Of course, there is a varying degree of rain in different months of the year, but every day essentially there will be rain in this region. Now the temperatures are pretty warm. So they range from 23 degrees of Celsius, which I have to look up is 74 degrees of Fahrenheit, to 31 degrees of Celsius, which is 89 degrees of Fahrenheit, but they can go as low as 22 degrees of Celsius, which is 72 of Fahrenheit, and as high as 33 degrees of Celsius and 92 of Fahrenheit and above. So this is a pretty warm climate. November, I believe, is the wettest month of the year where this plant naturally grows, and August is the driest. But this is not really dry because every single month there is going to be a lot of rain. The warmest day is also in August, and the sunniest is in July, which I actually don't know that it means that much to us in cultivation, but the coldest month is in January, which is of course still very warm. Just refer back to those low temperatures. So this is a Hoya that does like to be grown warm. Once again, we will circle back to the temperature a bit later in the video. At the time of publication for Hoya undulata, when they talk about how present it is in nature, it was actually marked as data deficient. So it is known only from one type locality, and over the years I do believe that this has changed. Now I don't have direct insight into what is going on in West Kalimantan. I have never been, but if you want to send me there, please do. Watch more of the videos. But I have talked on occasion with people who have been to Borneo, and they tell me that it is practically extinct in the nature. And a big reason for that is because of the pressure from cultivation. I really wish the buses would stop passing by. Like, can people just understand that I need the street to be cleared when I'm recording videos? So anyway, I don't have the direct insight into the natural habitat of this plant, but I do believe when they say that this plant is essentially endangered or practically extinct. The reason for this is, of course, when Hoya undulata appeared, it was very popular, and this was sort of the Hoya to get. I think now it is maybe not as popular. I think that it's still very coveted, and you know, Hoya undulata is a bit of a divisive plant. You will either love it or hate it, but right now, I would say that availability on market is pretty good. You can find this Hoya online. Many people have imported plants over the years, have grown them out, and they propagate them. Now, what kind of a plant you will buy depends where you are buying it. So typically, if you're buying something from a collector, it will be a rooted or unrooted cutting, 1 to 2 nodes. Rarely they are going to sell you something that's larger than that unless they are offloading their collection and they no longer want to grow the plant. But you can definitely import this as a larger plant. Actually, recently Wild Fern made a video where she got a pretty large Hoya undulata from Cartel Dawn, which I also have, but mine is much smaller. But I did get some anthuriums from them, so I will show you that plant a little bit later. So it really depends where you are getting this plant. So if you're importing, there are different sizes. They always offer like smaller, medium, and larger plant. But if you're buying from a collector, if you're buying from an online store that sort of propagates their plants by themselves, you're typically looking at a smaller plant, which is actually something that I prefer. I prefer to get my Hoyas through collectors because I just don't have to go through the hustle of importing. I don't really care as much about savings. I mean, I do care about savings, of course, but to me, it's not really worth it. I don't know. I never liked the idea of importing from Asia because it's too stressful for me. I am just someone who is very high-strung when it comes to, you know, when plants have to arrive to me. So thank you very much. I don't think that Hoya undulata is going to show up in garden centers anytime soon. Maybe like in a really well-equipped nursery you can find it that also sort of propagate their own plants, but typical garden centers like we have in Europe, I don't think you're going to find Hoya undulata there. I have checked several sort of plant markets, like stock market types of things here in Europe, and while they offer a lot of other plants, they don't really offer Hoya undulata, so I don't think it's massively being pushed out. Maybe you will catch one on occasion, but I still don't think this is something that's, you know, out there en masse. When it comes to the price of Hoya undulata, this plant is still, I would say, fairly expensive. When I say fairly expensive, I mean you're not going to pick this up even as a cutting for 10 to 15 bucks. You're going to have to pay, I would say, at least 50 euros or $50, depending where you are. Of course, in Southeast Asia, it is going to cost less because, well, that's where it comes from. And if you are importing the plant, you are very likely going to pay less. Of course, there are some risks with imports, which we are going to talk about in the next chapter, which you need to be prepared for. But again, if you are looking to buy this plant, do expect to spend at least $50. I paid for mine $65. This was in 2020. It was one node, 3-leaf cutting, and it was rooted. It was $65. I can't remember what I paid for the other one because it was actually in a package with 2 other plants, but the entire package was, I think, $100 or $120. But that package had Hoya naihusia, which is super rare, so we don't really know how much Hoya undulata was. I assume it was somewhere around 50, maybe a little bit less than that. And I would say that it is worth it. I think there are a lot of Hoyas in the market that are not worth the price, that cost a lot of money but grow like weeds. And while undulata can grow really well, it certainly never really grows like a weed. Not for me, at least, and I don't think for other people that it really grows like a weed, which I think contributes to the higher price. It is a plant that I think you will always appreciate it. Sometimes when we get new Hoyas, or at least this is true for me, I will get something and my enthusiasm will fade over time. I will not like it as much as I did when I got it, and I still love, love, love my Hoya undulata. So I think it's worth the money. Now, how does this plant ship? So this plant arrived to me from a Russian collector, Larisa Kuzmina, and I got it in 2020. I reserved my plant in 2019, in the fall of 2019, and because of the pandemic and the plant market sort of exploding, I actually had to wait until the end almost of 2020 for her to ship this plant to me. I don't think I was priority there. But she sold me a rooted cutting with 3 leaves and 1 node, and it was $65, as I told you. The plant was sent to me in September of 2020 and it arrived in November. I actually do have a video about this. It spent 40 days in the box and it only dropped 1 leaf. Other plants from that shipment, which were Clemenciorum, inner variegated Hirschkiliana, which was very rare at that time still, Maniporensis, which was also very rare at that time, and Onychoides, which I absolutely detest, and I don't have it anymore. They didn't have so much luck. All of them croaked aside from undulata and Onychoides. And Onychoides I just never really grew well, so sorry about that. But I was actually surprised because I thought it was for sure going to croak in the box. 40 days is long, even under extremely good conditions, and shipping in winter, which, I mean, it's not winter, but it was like late fall, is just not a good time. However, by some wild luck, this plant arrived well to me. Later, I think maybe in 2022, I took some propagations from my plant and I sent them to Sweden. I think they were in the box for maybe a week and a half, and I sent 2 of them, one to my friend Carolina and one to my friend Farah. The one that I sent to Farah was rooted and growing in pond for at least half a year, and it was very well established. I think it had like 5 or 6 leaves, something like that, and it even bloomed. It's actually the first time this plant bloomed with me. And the one that I sent to Carolina, I only just recently rooted in organic mix, and that one maybe had 2 or 3 leaves at most. The one that I sent to Farah croaked in the box. So the one in pond croaked. I know that I don't love pond, but no, that's not why. And at that time I actually didn't really know why it croaked. But the one that I sent to Carolina has done well, it has thrived, it has bloomed many times in her care, and I think it's one of her favorite plants. And when I went there, when I was in Sweden in March, it looked stunning. It's a really, really nice grown Hoya undulata. So that's my experience with the shipping. Now, let's just put her aside here for a moment, because I have the one from Cartel Dawn here. This is the one from Cartel Dawn, which you saw in my video. And this one actually rooted, so this is like a small update for you. I don't know if you will be able to see, there are some roots there at the bottom, but there are also roots here, you can see them on the side there, maybe. And this is how the plant looks. I'm trying not to tip it way too much. I don't know if this is a different clone. I had someone reached out to me, Lisa Butcher, and she told me that this looks like what she imported under Hoya undulata Army. I don't think this is a specific cultivar. I think it's something that they just added to maybe differentiate this from other clones. Mine just says Hoya undulata, so I will not be adding Army to it or anything like that. But this one arrived with rotted roots. The stem was intact, and this spent about 2 weeks in the box. Now, the roots, I would say, did not rot because of shipping, but just because of the whole process these plants need to go through when they are imported or exported. So I will explain that process to you right now, and this is something that all of the plants have to go through if you are importing from abroad legally. This is the process that they absolutely must go through. So what is done? You have a plant like this Hoya undulata that they sent to me. You have to, or they have to remove all the potting mix from the plant. Then it has to be dipped in insecticide. Typically what is used is imidacloprid, and that's something like Confitter. And it has to be dipped into that. They have to write it on the label or the form what insecticide it's used, and it's usually imidacloprid from what I've seen. I personally don't have or never received that paper because plants never directly arrived to me, even Cartel Dawn. So they have like hubs throughout the world, Europe too, where they send these plants and then they're repackaged and sent to me. So there is actually no reason for them to send phytosanitary certificate to me. On the phyto, if you have ever done import or if you know someone who does imports, you will see what they have used. So it has to be dipped into insecticide, absolutely bare-rooted. And bear in mind that when you are stripping the plant from the potting mix in which it has been, and there are many different potting mixes, a lot of the times what they use is cocoa husk because it's the most cost efficient. It will damage the roots, just that. Then you're dipping it into insecticide that is very strong, so that further sort of damages the roots. And then they have to be left to dry out because you can't send plants that are wet. The leaves have to dry out because if you pack something that is moist, you're risking fungal issues in the box, right? So it has to be dried. Usually they hung stuff upside down to dry better. And then it's wrapped in moss, the root ball, and then they're packed and shipped to you. A lot of the plants, a lot of the Hoyas have very sensitive roots, and Hoya undulata is definitely the top. And this is not a good thing when you're on the top of the sensitive root Hoya list. So she's definitely on the top, and my plant, once again, all the roots have rotted. I don't remember, I saw Fern's video, but I don't think she took a look at the roots. Maybe she did, maybe she potted it later. I don't know if she did a thorough inspection, but all of mine were definitely rotted. You could easily pull them away. So I expected that, to be quite honest with you. When they told me they're going to send me Hoyas, I knew that whatever Hoya they sent, it's most likely going to have rotten roots. And different Hoyas had different amount of rot, like Korea says Silver, which is actually doing fantastically. I will update you in a different video, had very minimal rot, and that one was the first one to sort of fully root. This one just recently started to root. It's been about 2 weeks here, I would say maybe 3. But as you can see, she's doing well. She never lost the rigidity in the leaves, which is also a good sign, but that really depends. It also depends like when the plants are being shipped to you. So if it goes through this process and the roots are sort of lost in it and it's shipped in very hot weather, you're likely going to get a plant that is dehydrated. Also, sometimes what I have seen happen with some of my friends like Basie, because she has imported some undulatas too, a lot of the times they will rot in the box as well, sort of near the petioles, because if the moss is too damp, it can actually rot the plant because there's no light in the box, it's stuffy in there, and then depending on the temperatures, that can affect the cutting differently, and they are sort of going to rot in there. Stem of Hoya undulata is in general quite sensitive. So I wouldn't say that this is not a good shipper, but I wouldn't say it is an amazing shipper either. It really depends where you're getting your plant from. I have sent 4, I think, Hoya undulatas, propagations from my own plant, rooted in Serbia, and those arrived within 1 or 2 days, and those did really well, of course. That's really nothing when it comes to shipping. Annoying to pack, but that's a different topic. But those arrived really well. So my suggestion here is, if you're importing Hoya undulata from Southeast Asia, don't go for the smallest one. I don't think you're going to be that lucky. Maybe you are, I don't know, but I think it's a better chance if you take something that's medium or larger, or maybe think about getting the plant from someone locally or like within your country, because I just think it's not worth it. I honestly, like, I'm telling you this for real. I had the chance to import plants from Southeast Asia. Farah offered it to me that she would take care of it because they import, they do a group import in Sweden. And I did it once. The plant rotted completely in the box, and I think I did it twice maybe. I'm not really sure, I don't really remember, but it wasn't that great. And I just think it's not worth it. You're gonna save $20, $30. That plant, maybe in Southeast Asia, they're going to sell a plant that has 4 nodes for $80. And in Europe, for example, where I am, in Serbia, well, not in my country because no one sells Hoyas here except of me. I mean, these super rare Hoyas, but let's say I look at sellers in Europe, the same plant is going to be maybe $100 for a node. It's a big difference, right? 4 nodes 80, 1 node 100. But 4 nodes 80 plus phyto plus shipping from Asia plus the risk of the plant rotting, drying out in the transport, I don't think it's worth it. If you are in the business of selling plants, then yes, but if you're just collecting for your own soul or your YouTube channel, I don't think it's worth it. I don't know. That has been my experience. I'm not trying to dissuade anyone from importing. I know that people have had amazing experience, but I have seen so many awful, heartbreaking experiences. And you know, some people say it's worth the risk. Personally, I am not that emotionally stable. So, not to say mentally. Not funny. Not funny. I just wanted to also add one more thing here. If you are importing from Southeast Asia, expect that you will have to reroot the plant. No matter what the Hoya is, expect that. I think that's like a good expectation because, again, very sensitive roots. Now, how to root Hoya undulata? Well, great question that I came up with myself. So we have this one from Cartel Dawn. Again, if you saw my video, you saw that I removed all the dead roots. Oh, actually, see from the bottom, there are even more roots here. Absolutely terrible idea. Absolutely terrible idea to tip that. So this one, I would say, is pretty safely rooted. It can probably actually exit the prop box at this point. I rooted this in my own mix that I use to grow Hoyas. This is a mix of orchid bark. I typically order orchid bark from Equagenera. I look for higher quality bark because there's none here in Serbia. I don't use bark from those potting mixes for orchids because a lot of the time they will have other things like very small pieces of moss, a lot of dust. So I try to look for better quality bark for my Hoyas. For my aerids, I don't really care, but for Hoyas, they get the most premium bark that I can find. And then I also have some cocoa husk here that has been buffered. And there is some pumice and a little bit of moss. And as you can see, this mix worked really well because this rooted in about 2 to 3 weeks. I'm not really actually sure about the date. You probably know better than I do, but that's relatively fast. The other one, which is here, this one is from Sweden, and we have a weird leaf here, which we'll have to talk about with this plant, but look at this one. It's pretty big. Actually, do I have water in this reservoir? Am I going to spill water everywhere? Let's check. I think it should be empty. Yeah, it's empty. Okay. Which is exactly the point of self-watering, right? To have an empty reservoir. So this one I rooted in moss. Now this one was a slightly odd cutting. The stem was very short, so I had to pin it down, which you can actually see here that it's also a little bit oddly potted. I don't know if that shows well on camera, but slightly oddly potted because of that. And I rooted this in pure moss. I definitely left it in moss a little bit longer than what I should have. It still transitioned really well to this mix, which is my Hoya mix. We will talk about the mix later. Essentially same mix that I just mentioned with my Hoya undulata from Cartel Dawn. And it did really well rooting in moss. Very easy to root in moss, very fast. About 2-3 weeks is what you will need. This one was also rooted in moss again. When it was sent to me, it was in a more traditional mix, but I rerouted this in moss. We will get to the story why that happened. And then I transferred it to bark and a little bit of moss. There is no pumice in this mix, I believe. And it rooted really well. Now I'm going to show you absolutely hideous propagation from this. Hold on. Bear in mind, this is garbage. And we will come to this. I rooted this in just perlite. I actually really need to do something about this now because it can't really grow. This is a very odd cutting. I actually made a video for my Patreon called Demystifying Hoya undulata, and I explained these cuttings. I had 3 of them, 2 of them recovered, and this is the last one that is left when I was restarting my big Hoya undulata. This is essentially from the previous base of the plant, and that base rotted. We will get into it later, but you know, I didn't reroot it for a long time. You can see that leaf is exhausted, and it remains exhausted even after this plant rerooted. These 2 are the new growth, and they're still small, and there is more new growth coming, which is hitting the pot, making it difficult for the leaves to grow. So I do need to lift it a little bit higher, but this is a very odd cutting because I had to essentially split the stem. Let me see if I can come closer and show you. You can see the bottom of that cutting is super odd, and it's like hanging by a thread of a root. It's essentially a rescue, right? Which is why it looks the way it does, but you know, we're working on it, we're recovering it. The roots are good. The roots on the side, and there is perlite on the side, but these were rooted in perlite because they could not be even pinned down. They kept falling out, and I essentially threw them in a bag with perlite, and they were in there for quite a long time until they rooted. They did need more time because they were super dehydrated. So I rooted in perlite. I also rooted in cocoa peat and perlite, 50-50, half and half mix. I rooted it in pumice and in pon, so a lot of different potting mixes. Now this is my recommendation. I would choose something in which you would like to grow your plant in. That is always the best potting mix in which you can root your plant. I know that now people try to say flawed is magic. I've never tried it. I don't believe that it's magic because they're just, you know, no magic. I mean, there is maybe magic, but I don't know. I never really had issues rooting in most of the mixes. You know, it's just like finding the most suitable one. For Hoyas, I find that moss is super suitable. I never had issues with rot. The issue with moss is you really need to know how to work it, which is, you know, when you soak it, you have to make sure to squeeze all the extra water out and for it to be fluffy. And then, you know, mixture that I use for potting my Hoyas, bark moss, cocoa husk, and pumice also works great for rooting pure pumice as well. So I just don't need another magical solution. This is why I never tried flawed, and it's also not very available here. I don't think that it's a big of a challenge to root Hoya undulata. I never had issues. I mean, my crab cuttings from that base, of course, those were struggling, but they were completely dehydrated. So that's the reason why they were struggling, not because it is that challenging to root it. But whenever I took a healthy cutting of Hoya undulata, I never really experienced any issues rooting it. In about 2-3 weeks, you can expect to see some roots. I root all of my Hoyas now in the mixes, sometimes in which I intend to grow. Sometimes if I'm a little bit scared, I will do maybe just pumice, or if it's for some reason more beneficial to do it. And I root them, of course, in the prop box in a warm spot. If you're rooting not just Hoya undulata, but any Hoya in a prop box, make sure not to water too much. You don't need to soak the plant. It needs to be damp, but not soaked. Spray the prop box and then leave it in a spot that is warm, not cold, not dark, but you don't need to put it under a grow light at all. And of course, no direct sun, so don't expose the prop box to too much light because they will cook. But also it doesn't, you know, you don't put it in the dark and don't put it in a cold spot. So room temperature in the proximity of your grow light will do really well, like somewhere off to the side. I usually put the prop boxes on the bottom of my grow tents, but on the shelf, not directly on the bottom because it's on the floor, and the floors can get sometimes a little bit cold. So just, you know, pay attention to those things. You can put them on a heat mat if you want. That speeds up the process a little bit. Ideal temperature for rooting cuttings is usually around 25 degrees of Celsius, which let me just check once again how much of Fahrenheit that is. So that's around 77 of Fahrenheit. Of course, they were going to root in a cooler spot as well, slightly cooler, not cold. They don't like to root in cold, at least Hoyas don't. So make sure that it's at least, normal room temperature where you are not needing to wrap yourself in a blanket if you're rooting Hoya. Again, I recommend the prop box method. I think it works the best. I don't root my Hoyas anymore in water. I think it's very impractical, it's inconvenient. Sometimes they rot. If you're using distilled water, they're typically not going to rot, but it's still very impractical. The water will evaporate, I will forget it, I need to refill it, etc. It's just much easier for me in a prop box because I don't have to water again. I spray them once and that's that. I check in 3 weeks, a month, depending, and you don't need to actually spray them again. So that's the beauty of the prop boxes. All right, so now let's talk about the potting mixes. All of my Hoya undulatas are now in a very similar potting mix. It certainly did not start off that way. I got this Hoya undulata, or I bought this Hoya undulata, as you know, in 2020, and it arrived in a mix that had a little bit ceramis in it, which I will explain what it is. I always get these questions, and it was mostly regular potting mix, a little bit of perlite, maybe a little bit of ceramis, but very little. And then I put this plant in my old Hoya mix. My old Hoya mix was potting mix from the garden center for flowering plants or even for green plants. I'm not really sure, I don't remember, it was a long time ago. But it had very little of that. It had a lot of bark, orchid bark, so garden center bought orchid bark, which is not the highest quality. It had a lot of perlite and it had leca in it as well, sort of for aeration. And this mix was okay. It was not the best, it was not the worst mix that I could put my Hoya undulata in. And I, at that time, didn't know that much about Hoya. I knew something, but I was still underwatering them. Actually, that didn't really change. I'm still underwatering my Hoya, but not because I'm afraid to water more, it's just because I have a lot of Hoya. But, different problem this time around. And it did okay in that mix. And then I sort of transferred this plant in just bark and moss. I got inspired by both Doug Chamberlain because he was growing in net pots, but also Miss Orchid Girl because she was growing orchids, and she still is, in moss and bark. And I thought, well, Hoyas are epiphytic plants, so let's combine these two methods, the net pot and the mix that Miss Orchid Girl used for orchids, and it worked really well. This plant loved it. Roots grew all around the pot, outside of the pot, fantastic roots. The plant also grew well. Unfortunately, then we come to my huge mealybug infestation of 2020, and I discovered that almost all of my Hoyas had root mealybugs because I didn't properly isolate the plant that I received from a garden center. It was a Hoya subquintuple nervous, and they spread throughout my collection. I was at that time also sharing water between my plants, so they were like on a joint tray because it was much easier to water that way, and I stopped sharing water after that. They are all in individual pots, and I make sure even when I take them to shower not to actually put them in the bathtub, because as I shower the water drains in the bathtub, so I don't actually put my Hoyas in the bathtub. I hold them, shower them, the water does drip, but I immediately put them back in the pot, and that helps. They can still get root mealybug, but you try your best. Anyway, I had to treat the roots. It was very difficult, of course, to get the plant out of the net pot, out of that mix, because it was just so well grown in. And then I did treat my plants with imidacloprid because it's very effective against root mealybug, and I put it in water for about 2 weeks, distilled water, for it to kind of recuperate. And after that, I put my plant in leca because it was the pandemic and I couldn't get any more moss. I couldn't import moss and I had to use something else. And I said, let's try semi-hydro because it was very popular at that point, growing in leca, which no one talks about anymore. I feel that y'all just abandoned leca. At least, when I abandon a potting mix, I shit on it and I get hate for it, but everyone else just stays quiet and they move to something else. And I'm like, dude, own it. Say it's crap. And I'm not saying leca is crap, but it's not for me for many reasons. It's good, you can grow it well in leca. Don't worry about that, but I think for the size of my collection and some of my conditions, I was experiencing some issues in winter with plants in semi-hydro in the reservoirs, but we're not going to talk about that now. So it was growing in leca for about 2 years and it grew okay. I propagated it during this period several times. I think about 5 or 6 cuttings I took from my plant, which I actually don't even know why I did that because I swore not to cut it, but I did. And then I transferred it to pon, from leca to pon, without rerooting it. I just sort of took it from one potting mix to another. And it finally croaked after about a year in pon, and there were signs. It was very dehydrated, it refused to hydrate when I watered it. It did bloom a lot, so I thought maybe that's the reason why, but it essentially lost the roots. I don't know if it's because of pon, I don't think so. I know that people grow Hoya undulata with a lot of success in pon, but I think it's just all of these repottings from one organic mix to another, to imidacloprid, to water, to leca, to pon. I mean, like, who else wouldn't croak, right? So the roots finally croaked, and I essentially as I was cutting down my plant, even before that, for sale, I had a base slightly smaller than this one. And I had a cutting, which is actually this. It wasn't this big. It had maybe 4 leaves or something like that. Something like that. I think about 4 or 5 leaves, maybe the cutting had, the top cutting of my plant. And now you can see a lot more leaves have grown here. And this is part of the base. So I cut the base into 3 cuttings. This is one of them. They had 2 or 3 leaves each. 2 of them recovered really well, and I did sold those. I'm keeping this one until it grows well to be sold, so it will probably need to grow out more, etc. I mean, the other ones that I sold were really nice, and actually my friend who bought one just notified me that it's growing a new vine and it's doing so well, which makes me really happy, but she has to grow it in a prop box because of her condition. So anyway, we get to this point here. When I rerooted this plant, so I had the top cutting, which is this. I rooted it in moss, and then I transferred when it rooted to this mix of bark and moss. It was about, again, 5 leaves. I think that's probably the good number. And that was maybe at the beginning of last year. So this is a year, at most year and a half worth of growth. First, it grew a lot of the leaves here towards the base, some of them prettier than others. And then we got this vine, and it's doing really well. This is the best it has done in its lifetime, and I'm very happy for that. I mean, I think I have a good reason to be happy. So Hoya undulata can grow really well. That's the conclusion of this. But the potting mix this plant is in is bark and moss. And I actually did want to change it a little bit because I think this is not the best bark that I used. And it's in a self-watering pot, which, again, I will tell you all the reasons why I think I should repot this, and then I will tell you that you don't, or that you shouldn't repot your Hoya undulata frequently, and then I will go against my own advice. But anyway, it's in a self-watering pot, which we're going to talk about this as well. And then we have the one from Sweden, which I currently misplaced. Oh, here it is. I like this mix a whole lot more because there is pumice, and pumice doesn't break down. Bark eventually will, no matter how good quality the bark is. And cocoa husk also is much slower than bark, from what I read, to degrade. So this one is in that mix. So actually, maybe this one is still not in my newest Hoya mix. And the one from Cartel Dawn is also in my new Hoya mix, which is bark, cocoa husk, pumice, and moss. There is no potting mix. Now, I want to talk a little bit here. I know this is like a super long chapter, but I will have to edit it myself. I want to talk here about Hoya undulata and how it grows in nature. This plant is a true epiphyte. This plant grows on trees, in ant nests, with ant nests. I'm not really sure what's the correct terminology here. So once again, it's a true epiphytic plant. I don't really know why we persist on using soil with these plants when they are actually true epiphytes. If you're using it, it's fine. I know that it can grow okay, but it's just a little bit confusing to me because we accepted that a lot of the orchids are epiphytic plants, and you never see, I mean, you do see sometimes someone put a phalaenopsis in a regular garden potting mix, and sometimes it can even live not always. But most people put orchids in bark and moss or in pumice, pon, whatever. But I don't know, for Hoyas, we sort of reject this notion that this is a true epiphyte. So I'm not really sure why. Again, it can grow with the presence of potting mix, with the presence of soil, but I think it's not the most ideal condition for the roots. So again, I don't know why we keep refusing this. It's a little bit unclear to me, and I think this is why this plant has gained so much notoriety. Let's do an improv here of a chapter, because I want to talk about the roots of Hoya undulata, and I want to talk about repotting Hoya undulata. Roots of this plant are very sensitive. They like to be warm, which I'm going to talk a bit later about, but they don't like to be disturbed. And I think that's a big issue with Hoya undulata. As you know, repotted frequently, you're really disturbing these very sensitive roots, which may lead to your plant later struggling and completely dying back. Again, I told you, I know this information and it's absolutely true. They don't like to be disturbed, they don't like to be repotted, they don't need particularly large pots. This plant is in a 12-centimeter pot, which may look big like this, but if you take it out, you can see it's actually not that big compared to the size of the plant. It's actually small, and it can stay in this for many more years, I believe, and the roots are not even in the reservoir. They sort of have more of a compact root. Of course, in leca, in pon, they're gonna grow bigger roots. It's true for all plants. They grow bigger roots than they normally would if you are growing them in organic mixes. And that's not because it's necessary, but it's sort of the nature of the roots to go for the water. What I wanted to talk about the repotting of Hoya undulata is try to do it less, because you're just going to have much better success with your plant. And that's why I told you to root it in a mix in which you intend to grow it in. This is where I also bring up the whole epiphyte thing. They like to be airy, the roots of Hoya undulata. That's why I recommend bark, maybe moss, to keep some of the moisture in there if you're not watering that frequently. Pumice can also help out there, but bark and cocoa husk buffered will give you that aeration and, you know, that similar condition to what it faces in nature. But anytime I repotted Hoya undulata, I would say there was a little bit of stalling to grow after that. Honestly, the buses just keep going and going and going. Where are all these people going when I need to record a video? Now let's talk about the trellising of Hoya undulata, and I would say that this plant absolutely needs a trellis for many reasons that I will tell you, and this is actually quite an important chapter, so don't skip it. Some people can grow Hoya undulata hanging. I have definitely seen that. When I say some people, I mean predominantly Camilla Gedin of Sweden. She can grow any Hoya hanging. I have tried to do what she does. I can't do it, so she's definitely magical there. But Hoya undulata is a Hoya that really does not want its vines disturbed. It likes to wrap around things with its vines. So as soon as it starts to grow, I would put a trellis in the pot so it can wrap around something and then it grows the leaves. It's one of those Hoyas that typically will push out a longer vine, searching for something to grab on, to twist around, and then the leaves start to grow. My experience has been that every time I'm trying to point this vine in any sort of direction, it is going to die back. At least the tip of it is going to die back. So don't touch the vines that are new, that are growing. Just put a trellis in there and they're going to find, hopefully, their way. In most cases, they don't. In most cases, you will have to do something a little bit later, because it will eventually, it will find something to attach to. They always seem to find something to attach to. And then when you get some leaves, I would then retrellis it, and then it doesn't matter if it loses the tip, which sort of has been the story with this one. I left it in my tent. I swore to myself I'm not going to touch it, and I really tried very hard, and I was somewhat successful, but in the end I did have to move it. So you can see dead tip, dead tip. This is not due to mites, dead tip. All of these tips were growing actively. Eventually had to do something about it because it was wrapping around 5 different plants, so I simply had to do something there. One of the tricks that I've used in the past with this plant and with some other Hoyas that don't like their vines to be touched is I will put like a large bamboo stake and then they can wrap around that, or I will just take a terracotta pot for stability, maybe put some bark in there, put a bamboo in that pot and just put it close to a plant or where I see that it's kind of going in that direction and let it wrap around that. And then when I see that the leaves grow, then I will, take it down and then put it around its own trellis, because Hoyas seem to be pretty bad about using their own trellises. They're very good about using someone else's trellis, like Invasion of Space, but, not so great about their own trellises. Now, this plant in the past has been on a tower trellis, and I didn't like the look. My friend Carolina grows hers on the tower trellis, and she did a good job trellising that. If you look at that video that Summer Rain Oaks did when she visited Toral Nye House, late Toral Nye House, you see that Hoya undulata, the Toral had, is also on a rabbit fence trellis, on a tower trellis, and it looks nice. I never liked mine on a tower trellis. I much prefer it on something like this, which is a bamboo hoop or a loop, whatever you want to say, or arch even, and it's definitely the look that I prefer. Of course, this is down to your personal preference. You can put it on a ladder, you can put it on whatever you want, but I find this to be quite convenient and I think it looks nice on it. I will say one thing, it took me an embarrassing amount of time to find out that Hoya undulata doesn't love to be touched when it's growing a new vine. It's perfectly fine to trellis it and retrellis it when it's not growing. Like my plant is not growing at the moment. There are no new growing tips, so I can retrellis it 10 times if I wanted to, and it's not gonna do anything to it. But if it was growing actively, it's best to just leave it, don't touch it, let it find its own way, and then when the leaves grow, once it has wrapped around something, when you're satisfied with the amount of leaves that your plant grew and you can accept a bit of dieback on that top growth, then you can retrellis it. And the reason why my plant finally grew so fast is because I stopped messing around with vines. In the past, every single time it grew a new vine, I would trellis it, I would mess it up right away, and they kept dying back, and I never really understood why that happened, but now I do. And I feel that has been the most crucial tip in growing this plant. Now, these are about to take off, so this needs a trellis. And actually this one from Cartel Dawn, I saw that it does have like a tiny growth point on the side, which I think is amazing here. So I will actually put a small hoop in there so it can wrap around something. Now, when to water Hoya undulata? Well, you've come to the best Hoya waterer on the planet. Or actually not, but if I didn't say that about myself, no one would know. Maybe someone would actually believe me that I'm best at watering. The watering of your plant, of course, varies on many different conditions. Your pot, the size of the pot, the material of the pot. Is it terracotta? Is it plastic? Is it a net pot? Is it an orchid pot in which you punched holes on the side? Absolutely, it should have drainage at all times. It is a self-watering pot, which I don't think they work that well for this particular plant, which I'll come to. It depends on your potting mix. Is it flat cup pond? Does it have soil or not? Is it something like my mix? Now, I would say start with watering once a week and see how that goes. This plant is something that doesn't want to dry out completely. And the reason for that is because the roots, again, are sensitive. If you let them dry out way too much, you will have dry rot. And then when you water, you get actual full-blown root rot. So it's not really advisable to let it fully dry out to the point where you see the leaves wrinkle, which has happened with this plant several times. And every time it happens, I'm super scared that it's just, that I'll have to reroot it again, but she has bounced back every single time. It doesn't mean that she's always going to bounce back, so I really should not be doing what I'm doing. I should be watering it a little bit better, but start with once a week. It doesn't have thin leaves, but it's not that thick-leaved Hoya. You would expect that the leaf is kind of like Hoya caudata, but it's not. Hoya caudata has much more rigid leaves. These are bendable, even when it's watered, they're quite pliable. Maybe the Carteldon clone, no, that's also pliable, the other one. Yeah, sort of too. They're not super hard. So this Hoya does dry out relatively fast. I know that the guy this plant is from, and he's a Swedish grower, Rolf, and I forgot his last name. He grows them in ebb and flow system. So he keeps the plants in a tray and they are flooded 2-3 times a week. It really depends on your settings. The water stays in there for about 10 minutes or so and then it's completely drained out. I have never tried this system at home because it requires a pretty advanced setup and a lot of space. So it's not very practical, I think, for myself. Maybe you have tried. Some people in the comments, let me know if you have. But this is a good system because, I essentially think you can't overwater your plant this way because it's similar to what they would go through in nature. They would get a lot of water and then they would dry out and get a lot of water. In nature, of course, that happens every single day almost where this grows. But, in home conditions, because we do keep them in pots, they stay moist a little bit longer. If you mount this, I would say you would need to water it every single day. You would need to spray it every single day if it was mounted because that would just dry out super fast. Now, I did promise you Ceramis, which it's kind of late for that, but here we are. Essentially Ceramis, and this is what I saw Rolf grow his plant in. It's clay aggregate, it's expanded clay. It sort of looks slightly thicker than spaghetti, but if you would chop spaghetti into like very small bits, so it is sort of cylindrical and it is a German product. I don't think it's made anywhere else. I think only one company in Germany makes it. It's very popular in Germany. It's very popular among orchid growers. I know some have imported it here. It's not sold here. I don't think it's very widely distributed in Europe. Again, I'm mentioning this because whenever I mention Ceramis, people always ask me about it. I don't know that it's available in the US and other countries. I think this is just mostly a German thing. And I have tried it. I think it's too fine for Hoya and I think it has a lot of dust in it. So I don't really like it. I would maybe use it in mixes, but probably not. So I don't think it's essential. But anyway, some people like to grow in it, and this is what this Swedish grower grows his plant in as well. In my conditions, I water them about once a week unless I forget. I haven't had great experience with self-watering pots. Actually, with this one, yes, because this one has a little bit more moss, so it's able to remain hydrated. This is the one that I'm having a little bit of an issue with, and I think it's because I really think I used mostly bark and not moss in this, and bark is not going to wick the water as well. A little bit, yes, but not as well. So I noticed that my plant will sometimes go fully dry even if there is water in the reservoir. So the roots are still not in the reservoir, they cannot take up the water. And if the bark, it's not that great at wicking, it just, it doesn't really work well. I do want to move this to a transparent pot, so I will probably do that. And maybe then I will amend the mix a little bit without too much disturbance. Now is sort of the time to do it because it's not growing actively yet. So this is actually the time when I should do something like that. And then maybe we will have a little bit more luck because I would love for this self-watering scenario to work out. It's definitely working out for this one. This one hasn't had issues with completely drying out, but this one has had issues, which is a bit unfortunate. And I think we could have grown a little bit more. But essentially, if you are watering without a self-watering pot, if you're not relying on a self-watering pot, once a week. And sometimes when my plant goes fully dry, which is not ideal, I fill this entire pot, let it sit in there for like 15 minutes, and then I remove all the water. I actually watered this yesterday after about a week. It was dry, the potting mix. The plant was still not dehydrated. And I just took it to a shower. And as we can see, it's doing well. But yeah, I don't think that this reservoir is doing me any favors, unfortunately. Though, I do see the roots have reached the bottom, so I'm not really sure why it's not wicking. Oh, I see why it's not wicking. There's like a gap. It's not actually touching the bottom. I'm an idiot. So what happened is I was recently, and this is actually when this started to happen. Oh my God, I'm so stupid. Oh my goodness. Okay. Don't be an idiot. Number one, what I did, this plant was on this trellis and it was doing fantastically, but this trellis was moving a lot because, you know, in bark, the trellises are really super unstable. So what I did is I took it out of the pot. After a year, I got so sick of it, and I fastened the trellis with zip ties. And apparently when I was putting it back, I didn't put it all the way down. Like, I see a finger of a gap there. And of course, you can see the wick is moving. It's not touching anything. It's not making contact with the potting mix. So this is the reason why this plant is not working out for me in self-watering, not because something is wrong with the pot or the potting mix, it's because I am dumb. And I should have pushed the plant lower. I think the issue, what happened is I couldn't push it lower because of the firm root ball, because I'm trying to push it now and it doesn't want to go down, but there's no potting mix, like there is observable space there, because when I was putting this trellis and fastening it, it's just stole some of the space from the pot. Yeah, okay, I will work on this. I will work on this. We will fix this. We will fix this. Anyway, as I was saying, self-watering is a really good way to grow your Hoya undulata, and I recommend it. It works great. It worked great before. I was really wondering, like, I know that it worked well for this plant and it's not working as much now. Yeah, I don't know what I thought, but it's not making contact with the wick. Anyway, even after growing a plant for 4 years, you can still make dumb mistakes, apparently. This is just embarrassing, but I'm gonna leave it in so you can see that I'm not perfect, if you ever wondered, and I don't think anyone ever has. Now let's talk a little bit about fertilizing. I did not do a great job fertilizing my Hoya this year. I ran out of my fertilizer and I never got around to ordering it again. But what I used to use is rain mix, and I will order that fertilizer again, but they didn't do terribly without fertilizer. But what I used to do, and what I will resume doing as soon as I get the fertilizer again, because I have to import it, is every time I water, I do use fertilizer. This is a really good fertilizer, not sponsored, but it's really good. It's used a lot in the orchid community. Equivalent in the US is MSU, orchid fertilizer. I would choose a high quality orchid fertilizer for your Hoya, and it's perfectly fine to use fertilizer with every watering. They do really well with being fertilized, especially if you're growing them in grow tents, in cabinets, under the lights, and your ambient is warm throughout the year so that they don't actually get to rest. Then you can fertilize all the time. If they do get a little bit cooler period in your home, if they actually enter that rest period, then you can stop fertilizing. But my plants grow throughout the year most of the time, unless they're having mites or unless I am not watering them. But when they're growing actively, it's perfectly fine to fertilize them. So that's really what I do. There's no magic fertilizer that I use, and I don't think it's the most important component. Good potting mix, good light, good watering habits is what is going to make your Hoya grow, not the fertilizer. It's not the most important component, but it does help. Let's talk a little bit about temperatures in your home. So this is a Hoya that likes to be warm once again. Temperature in my room never goes below 20 degrees of Celsius, which is 68 Fahrenheit. But my Hoya undulata, as we see now, it's not really growing. It's about I don't actually know, but I think it's about 21. Okay, we currently don't seem to have a hydrometer, thermometer, whatever outside. They're all in the tents or in the cabinets. But I think the temperature in my room is around 20 to 21. So it's not growing that much. It grows more for me from March to November, to the beginning of November. That's when this stopped to kind of grow. That's when the temperatures in this room are anywhere from 23 to 30 degrees of Celsius. So they're around 73.4 up to 90 or 86. That's somewhere where 30 degrees of Celsius is. So they definitely grow most when they are warm. If you are having cooler temperatures in your growing space, what you can use is a heat mat to sort of up the temperatures around the roots. I don't think the temperature around the leaves is important. Doesn't make this Hoya cold tolerant or anything. You know, you can't put it in a cold room and on a heat mat and hope that it does well. It will still need a decent ambient temperature, but if you are wanting to see it grow all the year and it's not growing, try to put it on a heat mat and see if that is going to help. Because again, this Hoya loves to be warm, and that's really the secret, aside from the potting mix and not touching the vines when you're trellising, to growing Hoya undulata well, to sort of keep that room nice and cozy for her. I have seen some people grow it in lower temperatures. I saw some posts on Instagram and they said it does well. However, their plants were quite old and very small. They were blooming, but I didn't see like anyone grow a massive Hoya undulata in like a cool room. It just doesn't like those conditions. It never experiences those conditions in nature. And yes, the plants can acclimate to different conditions, but I think it's a stretch to acclimate a plant that grows in 23 degrees of Celsius to 15. That's a big stretch there. And it's a plant that is generally sensitive to lower temperatures. Again, the roots are sensitive to cold, which is why I didn't like to grow it in leca, because my reservoirs would get a little bit cold in winter. But I also know that, for example, if you put it in a window and it's a drafty window, which is what I know someone who did that, their Hoya undulata croaked within days. So she's not cold tolerant by any stretch of imagination. It's not a good idea to order this plant during winter as well. I wouldn't do it. When I ordered it, I thought it was going to arrive in October, not in November, so I was super stressed out when that happened. It's just not a plant to expose to super low temperatures, maybe very, very briefly, and not very, very low. So bear that in mind. So let's just repeat, it is a tropical, capital tropical plant that rarely, if ever, experiences temperatures lower than 68 Fahrenheit or 20 degrees of Celsius in nature. Just bear that in mind when you have Hoya undulata. Now let's talk a little bit about light for growing this plant. As we mentioned in the publication, it was found on the tree in 50% shade. My plant has grown for a very long time on the bottom of my tent under my Mars Hydro grow light, which is 450 watts, dimmed to about 70 to 100. The floor of the tent is quite far away from that light, 1.8 meters, right? So it was quite far away from that light, and it made some of the most gorgeous leaves in that light. This one didn't have chance to properly develop because it grew in lack of space. But you can see this half silver leaf grew in those conditions. This one too, which is also another very beautiful leaf. I will show you B-roll. I got some of my largest leaves. The leaves are a little bit damaged because of, they're not damaged, they have a lot of calcium deposit because my water is very hard. And also I did knock over this plant several times, you know, so that sort of happens. Also, these leaves are sort of not velvety, but kind of like suede, so you can actually damage them quite easily. I find that these leaves are very sensitive, especially like when you touch them a lot. They tend to have these, you know, sort of traces that look like little scratches. Look at this leaf. It's just gorgeous. Look how big that is. A head test? Can we do a head test near my giant head without breaking off the leaf? I don't know. I mean, it's pretty big. It's pretty big. And they can get larger than that. That's like a nice big leaf. You can see the ones that have been closer to light are smaller. The ones that are further away from light are larger. And they can get very nice, very splashy. The splash turns pink in higher light or cooler temperatures. Both of those can make your Hoya quote-unquote sun stress. The back of the leaf is purple tinged, depending how, again, it was close to the light. You can see these are less purple maybe here. These are more purple, which I will definitely have to show you in a B-roll. There is no purple on these from a cartel dawn, which makes me think potentially a different clone, but we will see how it grows here. You can see they're kind of different looking. And then the one from Rolf, also I don't think it has, let me just see. Well, it has some, these actually two may be similar. They kind of look alike, don't they? Are you? Actually, you know what? The base of the leaf does look different in these two. When I'm comparing all the leaves, all of these have wider base of the leaf, so they might actually be different clones, which would actually make me super happy. We will see if there are any differences in the flower when they do eventually flower. So right now this is on a shelf, bottom shelf of my tent. The light is here and it's 20 watts or even 18. So it's not a very strong light. And again, if you want to get larger leaves in the plant, lower light is better. Not dark, still needs light, but I did have it on the top shelf under that Mars Hydro grow light because I didn't like it. It was too red. I prefer this look. I think it looks nicer this way. I don't know. Let me know what you think. I know that some people sun stress their Hoya undulata, and I have too, but I just prefer this leaf. Not this leaf, this type of growth. You can see this one was closer to the light, and like it's just not nice. It's just not nice, this leaf. They're gonna curl, and they're gonna be flatter when they are under lower light. I don't know. I think it's just more attractive that way. I don't think humidity is essentially that crucial. I had this plant outside the grow tent, it did well. Inside the grow tent, it does well. In the nature, it's about 80% of humidity. I definitely think you can go as low as 50, maybe even 40. Of course, there are some challenges if you go to like 20% of humidity. That's not great neither for you nor for the plant. So there are going to be some challenges there for sure. But I think like if you can get it to 50, I think that's going to be more than sufficient. I think keeping a good care of the roots is more important than the humidity, and finding a warm spot is more important than, super high humidity for this plant. So I don't think it's the deciding factor. Of course, again, it's going to grow faster. That is always true. They're just going to grow faster in conditions that are more ideal than those that are maybe not necessarily the most ideal. Now, we have to talk a little bit also about the propagation of Hoya undulata. I will typically cut 2 leaves because that's what makes sense to me. So 1 node, 2 leaves, maybe 2 nodes, but very rarely. The reason for that is this is a plant that makes a domatia. So it's just not really logical for me. And even with this one, I can see that it's forming this leaf that it made, this biggest leaf. It's making a vine here. So I think, I can't remember if this leaf arrived with this plant. I think maybe it had 1, 2 leaves, 2 nodes, 2 leaves. And it's just not continuing the growth here. Like all of these leaves that are popping up, like this one, it's going to make a domatia here, or it's going to at least attempt to make a cluster of leaves, and then it's going to push out a vine. Here it's already making a cluster of leaves, and then it's going to push out a vine. So to me, this is just not necessary. I can actually cut this and root it, which I actually might do. Do we? Should we? Not now, but like, should we? I think we will. So that's the reason why I chose to do smaller cuttings. But, even if you have like Hoya undulata, like maybe this one, If you take a cutting that's very long, that has a lot of leaves, you know, 5, 6, 7, it's just going to be much more difficult. It's going to take longer time for it to root. It's easier to root a cutting that has 2 or 3 leaves when it comes to, you know, large-leaved Hoyas. That's what I would choose. And maybe I will take some cuttings of this plant too. I actually do need to take a cutting for a trade of this plant, which I haven't done yet. So I have to select one. I'm actually thinking about cutting back on this Domatia a bit to kind of clean it up. We'll see. We'll think about that. Even this one with Cartel Dawn, I actually see another growth point towards the base. I could actually cut this right now, but I'm not gonna, but maybe. I'm having ideas. Because this cutting has a rooted, I can actually multiply this plant already. And again, I see a growth activating towards the bottom. But anyway, propagation, of course, via cuttings. They don't have to be particularly long. With Hoyas that have larger leaves, typically 2, 3 leaves is enough. With Hoyas that have small leaves, like Lacunosa and smaller, you should be ashamed if you do 2 leaves. I really hate when I see 2-leaf Lacunosa for sale, even when a variegated one was popular. I would never. At least 4, but come on, give me 6. Give me like 3 nodes, 4 nodes of that. We're not gonna discuss that too much, but for Hoya undulata, it's perfectly fine. Even 1 node, 1 leaf. But if that is shipping, I would avoid cuttings like that because they make me, again, really stressed out. 1 leaf is easy to break in shipping. I would choose at least 2 leaves, ideally 3. 1 node is fine, but choose cuttings that are not so risky. Anyway, the flower of Hoya undulata. This plant has flowered several times. Unfortunately, I find it very difficult to photograph this plant. It hasn't flowered this year, which is a little bit odd because it is typically a Hoya that flowers really well. So I actually don't even think we have a peduncle, which I vaguely remember knocking that off, which might be the reason why it's not flowering. Yeah, I think that I knocked off that peduncle. It did have one, and I was looking forward to it flowering. Yeah, anyway. I think it does maybe have one in the Domatia. Yeah, I see. It has a peduncle here. It's forming one there, so I guess it's gonna flower, but it did flower several times, this plant, maybe 4 or 5 times it flowered last year, and I had cuttings flower pretty instantly after rooting, so it is a willing bloomer for sure, but sometimes they go through periods where maybe they're not exactly flowering. This one also had a peduncle, but that one did fall off, just, it aborted it for some reason, so it didn't bloom, and the Cartel Dawn didn't bloom. But I have mid photos of Hoya undulata. They're not the best. But the flower of Hoya undulata is similar to Hoya griffithii, and it's similar to Hoya buntokensis in a way, but I would say most similar is Hoya griffithii. It's also pubescent. Hoya griffithii is not. The coloration is very beautiful, and since we're talking about Hoya griffithii, I'm going to bring one out because it is flowering, so you can kind of get like a visual representation. Enter Hoya griffithii from China, which is a profuse bloomer. So this is about the size of the flower you can expect from Hoya undulata. It's also spotted on the back. I do have to check a little bit for mealybugs here, but I'm not finding any. It's very similar. It's really, really similar to this. I wouldn't say identical, but very similar. And the back will be spotted like this on Hoya undulata as well. So essentially that is something you can expect size-wise as well. Both are fragrant. This one, I would say, is more fragrant than Hoya undulata, but this one is a much better bloomer than my undulata ever was. However, it seems that we are going to stop blooming now. I don't see any more flowers forming, which is a little bit sad, but it did bloom like a billion times. It really, really bloomed a lot. So maybe it's going into a bit of a rest after that, which may give me a chance to actually repot it from pawn. Yeah, it has a massive, massive root system here. Anyway, we're not going to talk about this one. My Hoya buntokensis is not gonna bloom soon, but that one also has a similar flower to Hoya undulata. Again, a little bit similar, but I would say Griffithy is the closest one there when it comes to the flowers. They last about a week and they change the color. They are more paler when they come out and then they become a little bit more vibrant, kind of yellow, orangey. Some clones have a little bit more intense color than others. The scent was quite light, flowery, floral. Some people say it's rosy. I can't confirm if it's rosy or not. I didn't write it down, I don't remember, but I remember it was quite pleasant for me. But it lasts about a week, which is quite good for a Hoya. Usually we get a day or two, depending on the species, but this is one of those better ones. They're still better that lasts 2-3 weeks, but I'll take a week. But I absolutely hate when they flower only for a day. I just need to get rid of those Hoyas. Now, when we are talking about similarity here, I will say that this plant, again, it's similar in a way to Hoya Griffithy, in the way that the flower looks like. It's also similar to Hoya mitrata. When this was published, the only Hoya known to us that had domatia, which is a house for ants, essentially, was mitrata and darwini. I do have a spotlight video on Hoya mitrata, which I think is very good. It was made a long time ago, I haven't revisited it, but I talk a lot about these Hoyas with domatia. Now, I will show you my mitrata. It doesn't look the best. Explain. Okay, I do apologize for a slightly different angle. My camera ran out of battery, which I need to buy more batteries for my camera. But anyway, Hoya mitrata, it's a little bit dehydrated. This plant was in pon. I am doing the soaking method here because it's again very dehydrated. There isn't a massive root system in this one. It's still recovering. So before I started to record this video, I soaked it in water. It's still soaking. So we're gonna soon take it out of the water. Also, it's flowering on 2 peduncles, as you can see. So that really is exhausting for this plant, but it was transferred, yeah, as I said before in one of my videos recently, from pon to organic mix, and she's not having the best time with that transition. But anyway, in the terms that the leaves look like, it's similar to Hoya undulata. It also is one of those Hoyas that makes a domatia, again, the ant house. And this is progressively looking worse, my domatia on Hoya mitrata. I actually am thinking about rerouting this plant, but I'll think about it more, I guess, off camera. But yeah, this plant, again, similar growth pattern. Essentially, you can expect your Hoya undulata to eventually look like this, but better. This really looked much better than it's looking right now because of all the issues with the roots. I really should not have repotted it from pon. I regret repotting such a large plant, but you know, what can you do? I should take a safety cutting at least soon. We'll see. It does tend to bounce back and rehydrate, but it definitely doesn't look as good as it used to look. So I think maybe we have reached the end of me having this large mitrata. Maybe it's time to start over with a fresh cutting from this plant that's been treated for mites. And yeah, then we will get leaves that are better. These just look a little bit exhausted. So we'll see. I'll think about it. But anyway, it blooms a lot, so that's why I keep it. This one definitely smells unpleasant, and the flower looks nothing like Hoya undulata. These look like teeth. Undulata doesn't look like that. But in the terms of the look, they're similar, especially because there are clones of Hoya undulata that are not as undulate nor serrated. So those can look a little bit like Hoya mitrata. And then what is frequently confused for Hoya undulata is Hoya caudata. Let me grab one. Naturally, I will grab the sexiest, most recently retrellised clone of Hoya caudata to make more space for it. This is Hoya caudata with yellow flower, Hoya caudata gold, and you can see what that looks like. And like you can see why people confuse these plants, undulata and caudata. And I thought about making a separate video, but I don't think it's necessary. Maybe we can make a video, you decide. I will do what you want. But what I want to tell you now, how to easily differentiate them, because sometimes from time to time there will be posts in groups, in Hoya groups, and people don't know who is who, so they don't trust the person actually telling them, clarifying the idea of their plant, but they tend to trust the seller more. And I will explain a specific situation here. There was a post in one of the Hoya groups, and the person got a Hoya undulata, another one, they already had one, and they said this looks a little bit different than what I have. And they showed new growth, and we all said it's Hoya caudata. It's not undulata for sure. And this person was like, yeah, but the seller told me this is Hoya undulata. You have to wait for it to bloom, which is something that I feel is being misused in Hoya community a lot. You have to wait for it to bloom. You absolutely do not have to wait for it to bloom to tell you if it's Hoya undulata or Hoya caudata. No, that is a lie. I'm sorry to tell you, it is a lie. Maybe between some other Hoyas, but undulata and caudata are easy to tell apart. Caudata has pubescent leaves, they're hair, and there is hair on the stems. Stems and leaves are pubescent with Hoya caudata. Easy to spot on new leaves, easy to spot on old leaves. Hoya undulata is never pubescent with the leaves nor with the stem. End of story. If someone is trying to convince you that what you have is Hoya undulata and you're suspected and you have hairy stem, hairy leaf, you do not have undulata. Undulata is not pubescent. End of story, okay? Actually, we don't need a separate video. So that's it. If someone is trying to tell you, wait for it to flower, they're wrong, and you do not have Hoya undulata if the leaves and the stems are hairy. You more likely have Hoya caudata. There are other differences, but maybe someone can tell you, different conditions, the leaves look different, yada, yada, yada. Okay, I'll give you that, but once again, hairy stem, hairy leaf, not undulata. Hairy stem, not undulata. So undulata does not have a hairy stem, it does not have a hairy leaf. End of story. Okay, I think that's the conclusion there for that chapter. I have talked so much that I don't really know what I said. I don't know where I am. It's dark outside. The sun has left us, etc. But I do want to talk about one more thing, and that's the different clones of Hoya undulata. My clones did not arrive with any description. I just sort of write down who they're from. There is some difference I can definitely see in the shape of the leaf. Even the new leaves, they don't really match with this one, and then with the other one, this one is wider at the base. All of the leaves are wider at the base. The veining slightly different, splash and all of that remains the same. I really like this one. I think it's very sexy, but yeah, it's definitely different. And I do believe now that perhaps this one from Cartel Dawn is different, but this one actually looks closer to that than the other one. So there are different clones, of course, of Hoya undulata. There is a silver Hoya undulata, which I really like. I don't have it. I should be getting a couple of more, at least one more Hoya undulata clone, and I'm really looking forward to that. They can get very highly splashy. Some of them are a little less splashy and more green. Oftentimes you will see Hoya undulata red. I'm sorry to tell you, it doesn't exist. That is Hoya undulata that has been stressed, or anthocyanins have been activated. Maybe I need to make a video about this. Hoyas don't only turn red in light, highlight, more frequently they're going to turn red in lower temperatures. When I say lower temperatures, I don't mean 15 Celsius. Just for a quick example here, I've had Hoyas in my window, in my southeast facing window throughout the summer. They never turned red, just the edge turned a little bit red. like my Priktai, my AH041, it was 40 degrees of Celsius throughout the summer. 40 degrees of Celsius. That hallway does not have any AC, so it was slightly cooler than outside, maybe 34, 5. But now it is 19 in that hallway. That's a massive drop. And they're red as a lobster. And there is literally no sun. It's like 2:30 now. I think it's 2:30 or something like that. Maybe it's 3. Yeah, okay. It's actually closer to 4. But you see, it's dark. It's getting dark outside. And early in the morning, there is no light until like 8 or something like that. So they're not getting a massive amount of light anymore. And there are no additional lights there, so it's not only sun stressing. But to kind of get back to our point here, red, not a thing. Not a thing. That's just anthocyanin activated Hoya undulata. Some clones, as I said, go under the name Army. That's not a specific cultivar name that I know of. And not that it couldn't be, of course, it could be, but I don't think that it is. There are Hoya undulata clones that grow faster than the others. I think this one is particularly forgiving, the one that I have. There are some clones that are slower to grow and that are more sensitive, more difficult to grow. A lot of the times you will see descriptions like Hoya undulata Sorisa, that's from Sorisa, from AH Hoya, new, stuff like that. But all of those are just different clones of Hoya undulata, and they look pretty similar across the board, to me at least. The one that I'm looking to get is actually the silver one. Same for mitrata. I'm really wanting silver mitrata, but the first one, not the second one. The second one I don't like so much, but the one that first appeared of Hoya mitrata, I think that one is really nice. And I think Hoya undulata silver is really nice because it's like various amounts of silver or different shades of silver, and I think that looks very, very pretty. But from what I know, there is some variation in the color of the flower, but they're all sort of cream/yellow. There is also Hoya undulata that has slightly less undulate leaves. They're more flat and they're more roundish. It's sometimes sold as Hoya undulata round leaves. So there are several different clones out there. The last thing that I want to talk about is the notoriety of Hoya undulata. It was at least pretty notorious Hoya. I can see why. She can be a little bit finicky, especially if you do make a mistake. She's not particularly forgiving, to be quite honest with you. She's not as bad as other people say. I find her relatively easy, but because I know how finicky she can be, I'm always sort of on my toes around her. I think most issues do come from not appropriate temperatures and not appropriate mixes. When you put soil in your Hoya undulata mix, you will have to water it less because if it stays damp for too long, it will rot. The roots are sensitive, especially if you do that plus put it in a cooler room. It's not gonna be well for it. But if you don't water her, once again, she likes to be watered. She likes to go through those wet and dry cycles similar to orchids. So if you don't water her, the roots are gonna dry out. They're sensitive. When you water her, they rot again. Then you think you need to water it even less, which is completely wrong. So I think big issue is not a good mix and not appropriate temperatures when it comes to this plant. I think it really boils down to that. And then, trellising, which took me years to figure out. But the roots, I never really had issues. I mean, I only had issues when I repotted it a billion times and changing from one mix to another, and then it finally was like, what are you doing? I have sensitive roots, Miro. Like, she was trying to tolerate me, but I wouldn't stop doing it. So she finally was like, no, I will show you how bad I can be. But, she's doing really well now. But I think that is the biggest issue. And the reason why this plant is so notorious, oftentimes you will see that this is one of the hardest Hoyas, but I really don't think it is. She is sensitive, I will give you that. She definitely is. There are some rules that you need to follow, and she's not gonna love if you don't follow those rules, but really, she's not that hard. There are many other Hoyas that I have that I can't figure out. It's like, oh, what is happening? I don't know. I hate them too, and they hate me back, and they never flowered, and they always look like crap. We're not gonna bring them up in this video, but So definitely not the most difficult Hoya. I don't think it's necessarily Hoya for beginners, but if you have had orchids, I don't think you should struggle with Hoya undulata because it's pretty similar to an orchid, but it cannot stay as underwatered as some of Phalaenopsis, or a lot of my Phalaenopsis actually do get underwatered a lot. We're not gonna talk about how much I underwater my plants, but don't be as afraid of this plant. I think I said this in one of my very early videos when I got Hoya undulata. I heard how difficult it is, but I'm like, I just choose not to believe that because I'm sure there is a way to grow it. And there is. It's not that hard. Really, it isn't. But it does have a reputation for a reason. We all have a reputation for a reason, right? Like when people think I'm a bitch. That has nothing to do with anything. But anyway, don't believe everything that you hear and give it a go. It may not be that bad for you. Okay, I think it is time to wrap up this video. I really hope that I replied to all of the questions that you may have about growing Hoya undulata. I hope this was helpful. I hope that you are not gonna have an issue with it after this video. Feel free to add some tips in the comments below, of course. Let me know how you grow your Hoya undulata, if you have some other insight, some new insight into it. But yeah, that's that. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye! I would like to thank all of my patrons for their incredible support. A massive shout out to my $5 patrons, my 2 anonymous patrons, Alex von Siebenthal, Amber Clear, Anne Margaret Moen, Angela Bernard, Angela Parrish, Anna P. N. C. Aspen Drake, Betsy, Brett Noble, Connie Pagano, Daniela Danube Daniels, Dipanjali Rao, Ether W. Erin Keenan, Elena Saxon, Ellen, Farah Ferdis Verdans, Gathering Moss, Gina Geisit, Gina Radovic, Go Green Tropical, Gross, It's Kyle, Growing Nurse, Heather Oppenkamp, Hoji Scott, HoyaCuttings.com, Yana Griffin, Jessica Chia, Jonas Bayer, Hjorth Larson, Joshua Davis Riley, Jovan Denot, Kara, Catherine P, Casey Gross, Callie Gallagher, Kelso, Kimberly Polka, Kiwi Mochi, Christy Ehrlich, Ellen, Bergley Mooney, Lisa Mary MPLS, Lucas Erchevsky, Mandy Milliken, Marcel Har, Maria Stein, Marina Yarmolich, Morris B, Marty Miller, Mary Rose, Melissa Walker, Michelle Heron, Mirka Grun-Roos, MJW, Moa Edmund, Miss Seidenhar, Nelly Yang, Nihabasu, Nicole Maroni, Nguyen, Nita Macy, Odette, PJ Plandrit, Sykes Zera, Rachel Peterson, Rebecca C, Sandra Cornelius, Sharon Bone, Sophia Ariane, Starla Van Lith, Stephanie H2O, Tessa Martins, Thomas Marsden, Tia B, Trista Bailey, Tristan Thomas, Wendy Rossman, Xenia Green, Youth of the Volumuth, Zaira Rivera, Zordarama, and Zlokov Niponi. Also, a big thank you to my $3 patrons: Karen Cologne Constance, Daryl De Rosario, Eden Corlett, Yana, KPZ, Lindsay N, Mary H, Monica Wykers, Nella, Nerdy Kathy, Renee Church, Ringlov, Sheila Casper, Tangwa Tanasria Cool, VH, and Wendy Foreman. And a thank you to my $1 patrons: 1 anonymous patron, Alice Borland, Andrew G, Aquila, Brandon Pacheco, Catherine Molina, Couture Helvetica, Emilia Bronson, Jolie Sullivan, Kayla Vavar, Kelly Ash, Chris Perez, Laura E. Jackson, Lauren at Tugboat Plants, Lorianne Subramaniam, Luzmin Fernandez, Marga F.V., Mary Diamond, Neely Spicer, Olivia Chin Mueller, Pacific Northwest Plant Lady, and Tracy the Eyebuller.